The young boy watched the nurse adjust his mother's drip and exit the ward. 8-year-old Ian was doing everything he could to keep his mom's spirits up. She had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and the worst had come to pass. She had lost the ability to breathe on her own and was being kept alive by a ventilator. Every day, Ian would sit next to her and talk, hoping that the conversation might bring her comfort or break through her sedated state. Despite their grim circumstances, Ian remained hopeful that one day his mom would be discharged from the hospital as healthy as ever before. He carefully watched his mother's sleeping figure and whispered positive affirmations. He refused to quit believing that everything would end up all right. He felt like it was his duty to keep up hope no matter how difficult things seemed. Although life could be overwhelming at times, Ian believed in strength and resilience and wanted nothing more than to see his mom finally heal. "When did the bills become this much? You have kept her in bed for a very long time. She's not showing signs of being better. You don't want to treat her anymore? Why? Why can't you treat her? I'll pay you. I'm trying my best to gather the money. You can't abandon a sick person. Don't." Ian's heart sank when he heard his father shouting from the hallway. He never heard him sound so troubled and concerned before, not even when they almost lost their house the previous year. Ian knew the reason for his father's rant could only be his mother's medical bills. They piled up each month, or so he observed, and served as a reminder of all the suffering she endured since her diagnosis. Seeing his father like that put a heavy weight on Ian's chest, and he wished that somehow he could make it better. But what could a young boy do? An unusual shift caused Ian to look away from the door where he focused on his father's voice, back to his mother. He felt a rush of emotion as he placed his head next to his mother's. Everything about the moment was overwhelmingly sad and filled with uncertainty about what her future would be. His mind could not help but linger on all of the moments they had shared in the past and how he wished desperately that she would somehow miraculously make it through her illness. If there was one thing Ian held onto like a beacon of hope, he believed that things may still look up. They just needed more time. With this thought firmly planted in his heart, Ian took in a deep breath and snuggled closer to his mom in an attempt to offer her some comfort amidst all the sorrow. Ian's father entered the hospital room, his face etched with worry. He forced a smile, but Ian could see the trouble that weighed on his mind. It was clear that he deeply feared what the results and bills told him. His father tenderly ruffled his hair and promised he would do all he could to save Ian's mother. Though his words were full of hope and determination, they still couldn't completely hide the fear lurking beneath them. Ian wanted to believe his father had truly found the courage within himself to withstand whatever tomorrow brought. But in the depths of his soul, he knew the night was far darker than either of them expected it to be. Ian and his father returned home later that night. Ian felt a wave of worry wash over him as soon as the car pulled into the driveway. He couldn't help but feel alone in his distress. As he entered the empty house, Ian knew he would have no rest that night. Thoughts of his mother so far away and unable to comfort him raced through his mind. He wished more than anything to have her there with him, to hold his hand and tell him everything was going to be all right. But without her there, Ian felt truly troubled and unsure of what the future held for them all. How he missed his mother. He eventually fell asleep in tears and woke up to a soaked sheet. Prompted by his dad, he prepared for school and hurried to class. Aside from the trouble his mom's condition gave, Ian's days were always filled with dread, knowing the jeers and taunts presented to him by his classmates when he went to school. Everyone seemed to enjoy calling Ian Long Face, and it only made his internal struggle more unbearable. After a long day of attempting to concentrate in class as best he could, Ian was left walking home alone, trying desperately to shake off the emotional burden that lingered within him. It was never easy for Ian, struggling with loneliness and facing ridicule from his peers, yet there was nowhere else for him to turn. No one seemed to understand what he was going through. Relief and anxiety washed through him when he arrived home to find his dad on the couch. He was relieved, because he had someone who cared close to him. But he was anxious because his father was never home from work until late in the evening. The surroundings were clean, and Ian wondered if his dad even went to work at all. He asked if something had happened at his dad's work, but the response he got was an evasive one. Ian couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness in the room as his dad started gathering what seemed like everything he could carry in his bag. He wasn't sure why. As soon as his dad began raiding the pantry for snacks, Ian knew that something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't fathom what went through his dad's mind. His father directed his thinking toward the hospital, and they left the house together. The atmosphere in the hospital was thick with sadness and despair, with his father's promise to find a solution quickly fading away. Ian watched his father sadly as he held his mother's hands and apologized, promising he'd find a way to make everything better. His father's sorrow was palpable, and at that moment Ian felt completely alone. The intensity of their situation consumed all joy from the hospital room. Hours passed, but he remained there with her motionless body, never letting go. It was an image etched in Ian's mind forever. At the stroke of midnight, Ian's dad solemnly approached him and held Ian's shoulders and said, "I will do anything to save your mom, Ian. I will." He kissed Ian's forehead. There was a vast chasm between the two of them as his father gave him one final request: to look after his mother in his absence. The atmosphere weighed heavily on Ian as he watched his dad depart, not knowing when or if they would ever reunite again. Something about his father leaving scared him. Tears brimmed in both their eyes, but the look of concern outweighed any sadness that night. It was an emotionally charged moment that neither of them ever forgot. Ian waited for his dad for what felt like hours, which turned into days. He was lonely and kept looking out from the hospital's window, hoping to catch a glimpse of his father's silhouette on the horizon. His heartache grew stronger with each passing minute as worry crept in that something had happened to his father. Ian had an alarming sense of urgency come over him, and he would do anything to help save him. But in the darkness of night, Ian knew he could do nothing but wait. At first, he didn't want to give up hope and do anything about it. Maybe there was still a chance for him, he thought. But as the days passed by, and none of his desperate efforts paid off, Ian couldn't help but be filled with fear and anguish. The doctors had no idea what to do. They were heartbroken at the thought of placing Ian's mother in a terrible place when her health declined, and even more, feeling like they had no other choice. It seemed like a hopeless situation until someone stepped forward, offering a way out and giving them an alternative. Everyone was struck with amazement and gratitude, their loneliness replaced with a sense of hope. Therefore, even though the doctors may not have known what the right thing to do was, help eventually came for them and Ian's mother in the form of a guardian angel who saw exactly what needed to be done. Although not in full comprehension of the situation, Ian's gratitude could hardly be described as he heard the news that their situation had been taken up by an NGO. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off of him, and everything good seemed possible once again. His mother was finally able to get the medical help she needed, and Ian was relieved of the disappearance of his father. He could focus on being there for her and doing whatever he could to support her in her recovery. It was a difficult situation, but the hospital found a temporary home for Ian so he could continue living while his mom underwent treatment. Despite the difficulties they faced, they clung to the hope of her recovery. During that time, Ian visited his mom in the hospital every chance he could, and she remained strong despite all she had been through. As more time passed and her treatments improved her condition, their hope of her full recovery was no longer just a wish, but close to becoming a reality. Some weeks after, Ian's mother was wheeled into surgery. When the doctors told Ian, fear gripped the young boy's heart and coiled around his mind. He worried about what life may be like if something went wrong, or if she didn't make it back to him. But despite the darkness of the situation, he held fast to the hope that his mother would soon recover. He knew that even with bleakness surrounding them, things could only get better. His hope was not in vain, as she emerged from the surgery with a healthy recovery. even though there were times of uncertainty and fear leading up to the moment when she woke again. When his worries melted and turned into relief, young Ian never doubted the mercy of the universe and his mother's will to survive. His mother woke up a few days after her surgery. Ian was filled with thankfulness and joy as he stepped into his mother's outstretched arms. He had to fight back tears of happiness as her delicate embrace whisked away the weight of the worries and troubles of the previous weeks. Reunited, the two were focused on nothing but the present moment, a time to celebrate life and embrace its unpredictable beauty. Ian felt comforted knowing his mom was standing by his side, ready to face whatever life brought with him. This reminder of love gave him hope for what was yet to come. He often remembered his dad and even told his mom about it. It always made them feel sad, even if it was something small that crossed his mind, like the way his dad would hum a certain tune or a funny phrase he'd use. But even though things weren't the same as they used to be, his mom was still there for him, and that provided more than he could ever need. He looked up to her strength and courage when things felt tough. She could be counted on to lighten the mood with her laughter and witty banter. Though at times there were tears in her eyes when they talked about his dad, he knew she held on to all of their treasured memories together with joy and deep gratitude in her heart. He only wished his dad didn't disappear as he did. He prayed that one day his dad reappeared the same way he disappeared.